Renata Cole had 90 seconds to save a man's life once. She remembered every second of it. She did not expect, 3 years later, for that same man to walk into her boardroom and try to take her company apart. She didn't recognize him at first. 3 years changes a face, and the last time she'd seen Eli Whitfield, he'd been unconscious on a warehouse floor, half his rib cage crushed under a collapsed loading rack, while the rescue robot her team had rushed through testing pulled him free in the 90 seconds that meant the difference between a man who walked again and a man who didn't. She remembered standing in the control room, screaming at a screen. She had not, until this exact moment, connected that memory to the calm, sharp-suited man now taking a seat across the table from her, flanked by Marcus Hale, the most feared patent attorney on the East Coast. "Ms. Cole," Marcus said, opening a folder with the particular relish of a man who has already won. "Thank you for making time. My client, Halcyon Dynamics, holds the original patent on the rescue grip technology your company uses in every unit you've built. We believe your entire rescue line infringes on that patent. We're prepared to file Monday morning for an order that would shut down every unit you currently have out in the field." Renata felt the floor of her own company shift under her. Solen's rescue division wasn't a side project. It was the reason the company existed at all. The reason she'd founded it 9 years ago, after watching her father die in a mine collapse that better equipment might have prevented. An order like that wouldn't just cost money. It would pull working rescue units out of warehouses, hospitals, and disaster zones mid-deployment, while the case dragged through court for years. "And you," she said, looking past Marcus, finally fully, at the man beside him. "You're Eli Whitfield." Something moved behind his eyes. Recognition returned. "I am," he said. "You're the reason that patent even exists," she said slowly. "You filed it 3 years ago, while you were recovering." The room went very still. Marcus's pen stopped moving. "I did," Eli said. "You filed a patent," she said, "on something almost identical to the machine that pulled you out of that warehouse. The one my engineers built. The one I personally redesigned 3 times because the first 2 versions wouldn't have been fast enough to reach you." "I'm aware of what saved me," Eli said quietly. "I was there for it." "Then explain to me," she said, "how you're sitting across this table helping a company I've never heard of take that technology away from the next person who'll need it." Marcus interjected smoothly. "Ms. Cole, the law doesn't owe gratitude. My client's patent predates your deployment by 11 months. That's all that matters here." "I wasn't asking you," Renata said, not looking away from Eli. Eli held her gaze for a long moment. Then he closed the folder in front of him. "Marcus," he said, "give us the room." "Eli, 5 minutes." Marcus left, visibly unhappy. The door closed. For the first time in 3 years, Renata Cole and Eli Whitfield were alone in a room, and the silence between them was 20 stories tall. "I didn't take this case to hurt you," Eli said finally. "You took a case that could end my company." "I took a case," and he said, "because 18 months after that warehouse, I went back to school and became a lawyer. And I spent 2 years learning everything I could about how rescue machines actually work, because I wanted to understand exactly what had saved my life. Halcyon hired me because I understand that machinery better than any lawyer they have." He paused. "I didn't know the company on the other side was Solen until I opened the file at midnight, 3 days ago. By then I was already on the case. I couldn't quietly disappear without raising questions that would have delayed everything for both sides anyway." "So you're trapped," she said. "How convenient." "I'm not trapped." His voice was even. "I could have asked to step back this morning and let someone else sit across from you with no memory of what your engineers built. I came myself because I might be the only person in that room who can find a way through this that doesn't take a piece of equipment I owe my legs to off the market." She studied him. The boy from the warehouse floor, barely conscious, gripping her hand in the ambulance and asking if the machine had been damaged, more worried about it than about himself. She hadn't expected to find that same instinct still alive in the man across the table. "Then find it," she said, "because Monday morning, if Halcyon files, I lose units that are right now inside 3 active disaster sites. People will die who wouldn't have." "I know," he said. "I've known since midnight 3 nights ago. I haven't slept since." The questioning that followed lasted 6 hours. It was brutal. Marcus found every gap in 9 years of paperwork, every form Renata's company, built fast, built scared, hadn't filed perfectly. Eli sat beside him and said almost nothing. Renata watched him instead, taking careful notes, comparing dates against a timeline only someone who lived inside the machine himself could have remembered so precisely. At 8 that night, exhausted, the session ended. Marcus left for his hotel. Renata sat alone in the empty conference room, staring at a stack of paper that read, on the page, like the end of everything she'd built. Eli found her there an hour later. "You're still here," he said. "I have nowhere else to be that isn't worse than this." He sat down across from her, not as the other side now, just a man in a wrinkled shirt who hadn't slept in 3 nights. "I found something," he said. "Halcyon's patent describes a machine that grips and holds. But the way your unit actually works is different. It senses how much pressure a body can safely take and adjusts as it pulls, instead of just gripping and holding on. I know that, because that adjustment is the reason I have ribs that healed straight instead of ribs that didn't." Renata sat up. "You're saying we built something different. I'm saying there's a real argument that your engineers solved the same problem in a different way. It's not a guaranteed win, but it's a real defense, and it's one Marcus doesn't know exists yet, because he's never had to understand the difference the way I do." "Why are you telling me this?" she said quietly. "You work for them." "I work for a client whose case I'm required to represent honestly," he said. "I'm not required to let them win on a misunderstanding of how the machine actually works. When I happen to be the one person who knows better." He paused. "I can't hand you the answer. That would cross a line. But I can make sure tomorrow that the right question gets asked. By someone. It won't be me asking it." "You're walking a very narrow line." "I've been walking it since I read your name on that file," he said. "I decided 3 nights ago I wasn't going to be the reason something that saved my life gets pulled out of a disaster zone over a misunderstanding I happen to be able to fix." She looked at him for a long time in the half-dark of the empty room, the city lights through the window the only thing lighting either of their faces. "Why didn't you just tell me this on a phone call?" she said, quietly. "Why come back here at 9 at night looking like you haven't slept in a week?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because the truth is," he said, "I've thought about you for 3 years. Not in the case file way. In the other way. The doctor who took my breathing tube out told me, once I finally asked, that the head of the company had stayed in that control room the entire time, refusing to leave, working the problem in real time while the machine was still pulling me out of the wreckage." He held her gaze. "I've spent 3 years occasionally wondering about a woman I'd never properly met, who apparently doesn't know how to stop solving a problem, even while it's saving someone's life. And then 4 days ago, her name showed up on a case file, and I found out I was about to be the reason her company might not get to save the next person." The room was very quiet. "I'm not telling you this to change how the case goes," he said. "I'm telling you because I can't sit across from you again tomorrow pretending this is only about a lawsuit." Renata didn't say anything for a long moment. When she did, her voice had lost its boardroom edge entirely. "You should know," she said, "that I asked the hospital for updates after the accident. They wouldn't tell a CEO with no relation to you anything. I assumed eventually that you'd built a life that had nothing to do with us anymore, and told myself that was the right ending. The machine does its job and disappears." She looked at him. "I did not expect the next chapter to be you walking into my boardroom, holding a folder that could end the company that built it." "Neither did I." "What happens tomorrow?" she asked. "If the right question gets asked, and it turns out you're right, then Halcyon's case falls apart. Your units stay where they're needed, and Marcus spends a long time wondering how his own side handed yours the answer, without anyone technically handing over anything." A small, tired, almost smile. "And I'll have done my job exactly as honestly as it's supposed to be done, while also, for the first time in 3 years, not regretting that I picked up the phone when Halcyon called." "And after that," she said, "what happens after tomorrow?" He looked at her steadily. "After tomorrow, I'm off this case, win or lose, because whatever this is between us has stopped being something I can pretend isn't real." He paused. "After that, I'd like to take you to dinner. Not to talk about the case. I'd like, for one evening, to just be the man your machine pulled out of a warehouse, sitting across from the woman who wouldn't leave the control room until I was breathing on my own, with nothing professional left to manage between us. Renata felt something she hadn't let herself feel in 9 years of building a company on the memory of her father's death. A wall coming down on purpose, by her own hand, instead of being knocked down by something she couldn't control. Ask the right question tomorrow, she said quietly. Save the units. Then ask me to dinner properly, when neither of us is sitting on the wrong side of a table. Is that a yes? That's a yes, she said, to the version of this that doesn't start with either of us giving something up to get there. The hearing the next morning lasted 40 minutes. A junior lawyer on Halcyon's side, working from a question Eli had quietly left in a shared file at 6 that morning, asked exactly the right thing about how the two machines actually worked. The answer, pulled straight from Solen's own records, made clear the two systems weren't the same. Halcyon dropped its case that afternoon. It settled within the month for a small licensing fee that changed nothing about Solena's units already out in the world. Eli stepped away from the case the same day the hearing ended, telling both firms and the court exactly why, before anyone could accuse him of hiding anything. He took Renata to dinner 11 days later, at a small restaurant with no boardroom, no files, no badge clipped to either of their jackets. I have to ask you something, she said partway through the meal, that I've wondered since the warehouse. Ask. In the ambulance, you asked if the machine had been damaged, not if you'd live, not if you'd walk again. You asked about it. She studied him. Why? He thought about it seriously, the way he thought about everything. Because some part of me already understood, he said, that whatever reached me in time was going to matter to a lot of people who weren't me yet. I think I knew, even half-conscious on that floor, that the most important thing in the room wasn't whether I made it. It was whether the next person would. Renata looked at him across the table, the city moving past the window, nothing left standing between them. That's the exact thought I had, she said quietly, every night for 9 years building this company. I just never expected to hear it back from the one person it actually saved. That dinner became another. Then a Sunday morning where she showed up at his apartment with 2 coffees and no excuse prepared, because for the first time in years, she hadn't needed one. It wasn't easy in the way the case had made it look easy, settled and clean within a month. The case had a deadline. This didn't, and the absence of one frightened her more than any lawsuit had. I don't know how to do this without something to fix, she admitted 6 weeks in, sitting on his fire escape with her knees pulled up, watching the city go about its evening below them. I know how to build a company. I know how to win an argument. I have never once in 9 years sat in a room with someone and had nothing to solve. You're not supposed to fix this, Eli said. This isn't broken. Then what is it? I think it's just supposed to be allowed to happen slowly, he said, which I realize is the least satisfying answer either of us has ever heard. She laughed, surprising herself with how easily it came. He'd noticed that about her in the weeks since the hearing, the laugh arriving faster each time, her shoulders dropping a little lower every week, like something she'd been carrying since her father's funeral was finally being set down. It wasn't without trouble. 3 months in, a journalist working a story about Solen's near miss with Halcyon found out, through a careless comment, that Renata Cole and the lawyer who'd suspiciously stepped off the case were now dating. The story ran with a headline implying exactly the wrong thing. CEO's romance with opposing lawyer raises questions about settlement. Renata called Eli at 11 that night, her voice tight in a way he hadn't heard since the boardroom. They're saying I bought my way out of that case, she said, that you threw it for me. I know. I already called the lawyer's ethics board myself this afternoon and asked them to review everything I did on the case, every email, every hour, every form I filed the day I stepped away. I'd rather have someone outside confirm I did this clean than spend one day wondering if you're quietly doubting it. You didn't have to do that. I did, he said, because whatever we are can't be built on you having to take my word for it. It has to be built on something neither of us can argue with later, on a worse night than this one. The review took 3 weeks. It cleared him completely. The question that had broken Halcyon's case had come from a junior lawyer with no connection to Eli, and the disclosure he'd filed the week he left the case predated any relationship between them, confirmed by records neither of them controlled. The story corrected itself, smaller and quieter, days later. Renata found Eli on the fire escape again the night the correction ran, and instead of sitting across from him, she sat down beside him, her shoulder against his, in a way she hadn't let herself do in the easier early weeks. I spent 9 years, she said, making sure nothing could ever be used against this company the way that almost was. I built every rule, every wall, specifically so no one could ever say something personal had compromised something I built. She looked at him. And then you walked into my boardroom holding a folder that could have ended everything. And instead of being the thing the wall was built to keep out, you turned out to be the first person who made me wonder if the wall had gotten too tall to live behind. I'm not asking you to take it down for me, he said. I know what it cost you to build it. I know, she said. That's exactly why I'm taking it down anyway. She kissed him there, on the fire escape, with the city going about its ordinary business below them. No boardroom, no badge, no case left between them. Only the slow, unhurried, fully earned thing that had been built, this time, on purpose, by two people who had already proven to each other, under real pressure, exactly who they were. Here is what it looks like when the thing that almost destroys you turns out to be the very thing built to save you, twice. It doesn't arrive gently. It rarely arrives as recognition. It arrives instead as a stranger across a boardroom table holding a folder that could end everything you've built. And only later do you realize the stranger and the rescue were never two different stories. It comes in the moment someone risks their own career, their own reputation, to make sure the right question gets asked instead of the convenient one. It comes when two people who once shared the most desperate 90 seconds of one of their lives finally sit down with nothing left to manage between them. And it comes later still, in the slower work that follows, the doubt that arrives without a deadline to hide behind, the public accusation answered with more honesty rather than less, the fire escape where one wall, built brick by careful brick over 9 hard years, finally comes down by choice. That is the moment no courtroom can produce. No settlement can manufacture. Nothing can substitute for the simple, unbearable risk of telling someone the truth about how long you've been thinking about them, and then proving it slowly on every ordinary night that follows. That moment belongs only to the people brave enough to walk back into the room after it's over and stay. Here is the question. Have you ever discovered that the person standing in your way was actually the reason you were still standing at all? Have you ever had to choose between winning and doing the one decent thing nobody would have caught you not doing? What does it cost to walk back into a room you have every reason to leave? And what becomes possible the moment you finally do? Leave your thoughts below, because the most extraordinary love stories were never about the meeting. They were always about what each person chose to do, quietly when no one was checking. Please like, share this video and subscribe. See you in the next video. Thank you.